Hello! Welcome to Queering Arthur, a podcast where you can join us in exploring queer interpretations of Arthurian legend. I'm Kelly Oakler.
And I'm Dr. Schuyler Rad.
Today we're talking about The Life of St. Cadoc by Lifric of Clyncarvin from 1075 CE.
This episode contains references to family feuds, rape and pedophilia as used in medieval literature, classism, prejudice against body types, ableist invasion of personal space, and corporal punishment.
If any of that sounds like it's too much for you right now, then take care of yourself and maybe skip this one. This episode is part 2 of a 5-part series of the Arthurian Hagiographies. In previous episodes, we have used our hermeneutic satellite to get that high-level view of the cultural context of Arthurian legend from the 5th to 10th centuries. As this series is about the saints, and we've looked at their cultural context, we have members-only episodes diving more specifically into the spiritual and religious context, available to the knights of our virtual roundtable.
And it's easy enough to become a knight. Just head over to our Patreon and sign up. Knights also get all the same perks as those at the retainer level, like early access to exclusive merch and access to the Queering Arthur Discord, where we continue the conversation on every episode, share art, fanfiction, and chat about everything Arthurian and queer.
Soon we'll announce another level to the virtual roundtable that'll make you part of a special project.
If you're still not sold, here's a sneak peek of that members-only episode. Computer, on screen.
Ah, the final frontier. Or is it just another day at the office? Look at that view, would you?
Incredible. The data we could gather from that planet could rewrite history. But we must proceed carefully.
Careful is my middle name. Well, not really, but you get the point. Let's fire up the hermeneutic satellite and see what windows open up to new horizons.
I hope you enjoyed that.
Now let's zoom in on the author. Let me guess, we don't know much about the author because it's from 1,000 years ago.
Well, yeah, there's some uncertainty about who the author is.
Well, uncertainty sounds interesting. Better than no information at all, I guess.
Yeah. So, let's get into it. A lot of sources point to a version of this hagiography, The Life of Cadoc, as written by Cadoc of Clyncarvin, mentioned in Monmouth's HRB. But in the White Anthology, this hagiography is attributed to Lifric of Clyncarvin. I'm not sure if just more than one version exists. I'm really surprised I couldn't find more specific information on this issue. So if any listeners know more facts, please email us, queeringarthurpodcast@gmail.com.
So is that the interesting bit? The lack of information on whether it's one of these two people who were the author?
No, so let's talk about Lifric. First, we need to talk about someone named Harold. Between the years of 1056 to 1059, Harold was elected, consecrated, and confirmed as Bishop of Glamorgan and Gwent by Edward the Confessor, who was the father of Harold II.
Ah yes, Harold. The king made famous by the 2015 movie Carol.
Yeah.
Harold.
No, Robert Fitzham.
What?
That's the Norman who conquered Glamorgan.
Oh, I thought we were doing the Harold thing.
They're lesbians.
Yay, lesbians!
Aren't we all lesbians really on the inside?
That's beautiful.
Sapphics are off the grid.
That's right.
So the records show Harold was consecrated again in 1071, this time by William the Conqueror.
So this is connected to Lifric, right?
Yeah, Harold was the father of Lifric.
Oh, okay. Go on.
So then Harold was suspended from the position of bishop in 1093, and his successor was a man named Urban, who took over not as the new bishop of Glamorgan, but a bishop of Llandav.
Okay. Is that the interesting bit? The diocese changed names after the Norman invasion?
Well, that's one part of it.
Okay, out with it. What is so interesting about the author?
I'm sorry. Well, I formed some hypotheses about all of this.
I am on the edge of my seat.
Do you like edging?
No.
Okay. What I need to emphasize is that these hypotheses, as far as I can tell, are not falsifiable, which means that they're not scientific. And we strive for falsifiability and replicability on this podcast to make things as scientific as possible. So I just want to highlight that these hypotheses are likely not falsifiable. And that's because the records were not specific enough, or they never existed, or they were lost for some reason. So this isn't necessarily playing fast and loose with the facts, nor is it pseudo-history, but it's also not real history, just some interesting observations.
Oh, okay.
First, on being consecrated.
Probably due to the politics of the invasion, the Norman invasion. The new King William wanted to ensure he was in charge.
Yeah, and that issue wasn't just happening there in Britain. It was a continental issue called the investiture controversy, which pitted the power of the Pope against that of the local abbots.
Right. As we discussed in the members-only episodes on religion, this is another example of centralization of power and decision-making.
Right. Centralization is a theme of religion in Britain in the Middle Ages.
Okay, what else?
Yeah, okay. Second, on being suspended, Harold had a son.
Right, the author, Lifric. So he was suspended for having a child because celibacy reasons?
No, he wasn't suspended for having a child. Celibacy was not required until 1139. But his son Lifric held a position of responsibility in the diocese as Archdeacon of Glamorgan and a position in the parish as Master of St. Cadoc's.
So Christianity was a family business.
Yeah. I'm not saying this was corrupt, but it was, by definition, nepotism.
A real nepo baby. Well, that at least calls things into question.
But also...
Here it is.
His father, Harold, was the last bishop of Glamorgan, and the office changed names to Bishop of Llandaff.
That's what I said. The job title changes after the Norman invasion. Is that the interesting thing?
Well, follow this for a second. Records show that Lifric was no longer archdeacon by 1094, 1 year after his father was suspended.
Uh-huh.
And the man who replaced Lifric as Archdeacon of Llandaff...
Urban.
Right. He was the same man who would become Bishop of Llandaff 13 years later.
Yes.
And Urban, like Lifric, was from a clerical family. And his brother was Cadoc.
Gasp.
I know! The other possible author, Cadoc, was the brother of the man that replaced Lifric.
Oh, okay. That is much better political intrigue. It's not just the job title changes names.
Right. The other person who was named as an author of The Life of Cadoc was a competitor.
So the Christianity was a family business idea. Urban and Cadoc's family beat out Harold and Livric's family.
Right. After the Norman invasion and Robert Fitsum took over the region, one family, Harold and Livric's, was ousted, and the other family, Urban and Cadoc's, was raised up.
That does bring into question who the real author is.
Like I said, uncertain and interesting.
Definitely. So now to zoom in on the text. Hagiographies were a popular genre in this time. Most were written in Latin, but many were written in Anglo-Norman. In episode 4, we talked about the hero's journey. Hagiographies could be said to follow a similar structure to the hero's journey, and this one is no different.
Oh, I really like how you're thinking about that. Yeah, in a hagiography, there's a call to action, trials and challenges, supernatural elements, a transformation, and a return. But, not that I wholly disagree, they might be similar, hagiographies in the hero's journey, but they are different. They have different purposes, different character concepts, different conflicts, different conclusions, different audiences. But if we were to stick with this similarity milieu, it's the trials and challenges phase of the hero's journey where Arthur appears.
Right. Arthur isn't the hero in this. It's a hagiography, so the saint is the hero. Unlike most Arthurian legends, in this work, Arthur is the antagonist, a medium of illustrating a moral and religious lesson. Arthur steals a bull, kills a monk, has a violent desire for an adolescent girl, and at first refuses to make recompense.
But at the intercession of St. Cadoc...
The hero?
Yeah. At the intercession of St. Cadoc, Arthur eventually acknowledges wrongdoing and compensates the Christians.
Okay. So this is a new one for us. In this case, seeing this hagiography as a hero's journey, Cadoc is the hero and Arthur is the one presenting trials.
This literary interpretation aside, but bringing in the cultural context of the author, it could be seen as intensely political, as at this time it was less than 10 years since the Norman invasion.
So setting up the British superhero Arthur as roguish and stubborn, and in some ways anti-Christian, would work to reinforce Norman power over the Welsh.
Now, let's get to the queer stuff, by not just zooming in on the text, but looking at the text with a queer lens. Arthur, the villain version, on page 14, it says he wants to kill a man in order to rape an adolescent girl. Kay and Bedivere, his knights, speak forbiddingly, and they say that they are accustomed to aiding those who are weak and defenseless. This is the first appearance of chivalry.
Is chivalry queer?
So for me, I'm excited to get the opportunity to finally share my ideas about chivalry. Chivalry is like being a liberal progressive. There's a direct historical connection between medieval chivalry and the modern progressive liberal world order.
Well, the discomfort with chivalry is the requirement of class. So where chivalry appears, classism appears.
True. Caring for others requires you to be of some higher class in chivalry, or seeing yourself as stronger and more able.
Yeah, classism is like prejudice, and prejudice is a preconceived opinion not based on reason or actual experience. Seeing someone as weak and defenseless requires some sort of judgment, and making that judgment may be preconceived.
So, chivalry is altruism, but caused by prejudice.
Right, like asking when someone's baby is due, but they aren't pregnant, so it's an insult. Or pushing someone in a wheelchair without asking. The same can be said of assuming someone is weak and defenseless and needs a protector. Like in episode 4, when we discussed the scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where Lancelot goes to save the maiden and indiscriminately kills a bunch of people. Lancelot is actually making everything much worse.
That's called pathological altruism. But chivalry, theoretically, could incorporate ideals like understanding diversity bodies to stop assuming someone is pregnant, or respect for personal space to stop pushing someone in a wheelchair without asking, or, yeah, like with the Monty Python, the Holy Grail scene.
Yeah, like try to understand a situation before going completely postal and killing a bunch of wedding guests.
Yeah, these are all ideals that can be added into a set of moral and ethical behavior. Aiding the weak and defenseless, coupled with those other moral and ethical maxims we talked about, like diversity, respect for personal space, and open-minded understanding, those are just key to being a good person, down to today.
Okay, so if chivalry is defined by aiding the weak and defenseless, and it can be modified so that it is not pathologically altruistic, then yeah, I don't see a lot of difference between chivalry and modern progressive values, where people who vote for left-wing progressive politicians do so because they think it will lead to more altruistic use of their tax dollars by aiding the weak and defenseless and enforcing anti-selfishness by taxing the rich.
Yes, I'm glad we can agree.
I didn't write this.
Zooming out? This reference to chivalry is complex because it queerly brings to mind classism and pathological altruism, but it also reminds me of this unbroken thread of altruism connecting medieval chivalry to modern progressive values. And it's this complexity is why this utterance that triggered basorexia scores a 0 on the queer authenticity scale and is neither authentically nor inauthentically queer. Okay, the last queer utterance on page 16, it says, he, that's Arthur, whipped the holy man humiliatingly.
Right. Arthur, the villain in this story, whips a priest because they tricked him. Arthur thought he was getting cows, but they turned out to be bundles of ferns. Why is this queer for you?
Well, it's the whipping is one thing, but it's the key here is humiliatingly. Whereas humility can be a virtue to de-emphasize the ego, humiliation is when another person directly or indirectly intimidates, mistreats, tricks, or embarrasses another person.
So it's the sadistic possibility of humiliation that makes it queer for you then?
Yes. And that was the immediate idea, but the text doesn't speak to whether Arthur enjoyed punishing the holy man or not, so it isn't really sadistic. Rather, it seems to be a reaction to some form of injustice.
And in the context of medieval times, whipping seems to be a rather tame reaction to injustice.
Yeah. But the humiliating whipping here is an example of a public display of corporal punishment, this spectacular demonstration of the king's power, which, according to 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault, is the first stage of punishment. Foucault traces a history of punishment, from this sort of medieval spectacle of corporal punishment to a decline in publicity, marked by a rise of prisons and other institutions that control people, like schools and mental institutions.
Yeah, in the earliest form of these institutions, punishment was corporal.
But because it wasn't public, it was a shift from the older forms of punishment.
But corporal punishment is still very much enforced in these institutions today.
But it comes about as a matter of regulation.
Ah, so regulated corporal punishment is different somehow?
Right. It's the third stage of punishment.
How so?
Because it shifts focus from individuals to focus on populations, such as through societal norms, economic incentives, and policies. Power over demographic aspects of the population, biological aspects of the population.
Sounds familiar. Disturbingly familiar.
Yeah.
Because we're living in it.
Right. Foucault said that was the principle of our modern forms of punishment. Rather than demonstrations of power through public corporal punishment or private institutionalized punishment, in the third stage of punishment, the type of punishment of our modern world, it's a state of self-regulation, feeling ashamed if you break a social norm, or like a sense of being a loser for not taking advantage of economic incentives.
Why do you litter? You're a litter bug. Why do you gamble? You know the house always wins.
Yeah, why do you smoke cigarettes? The taxes are so high.
Why do you drive a gas guzzler? You know EVs are better for the environment.
Yeah, these are all examples of how we self-regulate and enforce punishment on each other as a society through what Foucault calls the normalizing judgment, which in turn is a part of discipline. Discipline is this parallel idea to punishment. And just like punishment has 3 stages, discipline has 3 parts. That normalizing judgment, and the other 2 parts of discipline are hierarchical observation and examination.
In the text, Arthur, being hierarchically superior to the holy man, observes the injustice and punishes. But when there's more advanced forms of punishment, there is that normalizing judgment, and finally, in the modern era, the more advanced forms of discipline take the form of examination.
The key difference here, like with punishment, is that it is at a population level. But instead of taking the form of laws and norms, in the most advanced societies, like our modern society, discipline serves the purpose of informing where to implement intervention. For example, education agencies use standardized testing to identify topics needing improvement, or sectors of the population that need to be served better.
Or like from earlier, the powers that be examine rates of littering, probabilities of winning a hand at poker and gambling, or with cigarettes and EVs, they can do economic analysis. And these are all examples of how powerful institutions use examination to control populations. And so, zooming back, this whipping is clearly not an advanced form of punishment like a prison or cookies on your internet browser, but it's the adverb humiliatingly that makes it questionably sadistic.
And it's the lack of norms and laws or examination. Just simple hierarchical observation. Arthur observing the injustice of the holy man. That's what makes this the oldest and least evolved form of discipline and punishment.
And Arthur's use of corporal punishment is not surprising and even tame in the medieval context, which is why this utterance scores a 1 on the queer authenticity scale and is slightly authentically queer.
We would like to extend our thanks to our friends and family, especially Andrew Chard, who provides us with our audio equipment to record this podcast, our patrons, our listeners, and the Nisqually tribe and Squaxin Island tribe, on whose traditional lands this podcast was recorded. Land sold to the U.S. government under duress in the Treaty of Medicine Creek during the Puget Sound War of 1855 to 1856.
So where can our listeners find us when in between episodes?
Our YouTube videos are the best place to follow us. Watch those videos, like, comment, and subscribe. That's always really helpful to us. And we're on all the major social media platforms. You can stay in touch with us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter/X. We also have a Tumblr and a Reddit community. And the most personal way to get in contact with us is to be a part of our Discord, which you can become a member through our Patreon by being in our queer retinue. And if you have any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, queries, send us an email to queeringarthurpodcast@gmail.com. Now that you know a bit about the relationship between medieval chivalry and the modern progressive liberal world order, let me leave you with this. In addition to honor, valor, loyalty, respect, humility, and altruism, the values guiding the actions of chivalrous knights were also shaped by faith and religion. So if chivalry is akin to modern progressivism, then in a world with a waning influence of religion, is there still a role for faith? Stay chivalrous, Queerthers.